Welcome back, everybody. My name is Zachary Mattson. This is my teammates, Bobby Hutchin and Princia Andrianirina. And we had the privilege of working with CASA of Marion County. So just kind of show of hands, how many of you know what CASA is or what they do? Okay, perfect. So CASA stands for Court-Appointed Special Advocates. Basically, they come alongside children that are abused or neglected by their parents, and they provide an advocate to hopefully ensure that they have a permanent and safe home. So the CASA's problem that we began to work with is we saw that they had a limited number of volunteers. This was the biggest problem that they faced, and obviously, our group was tasked with figuring out ways to get more of those. And so our solution, first off, we kind of researched the financial benefit of a CASA. So obviously foster care children cost money, and having an advocate represent them can kind of get them out of that situation sooner, costing them less money. And so kind of our threefold solution was that they need to hire on more staff. They're currently understaffed, and we also suggested that they have an internship program and that they share their story. And so we'll kind of be guiding you through what they do, their story, and how they help children. This is what we believe to be their biggest selling point to gain more benefactors and more volunteers. So what is CASA? CASA is a volunteer, and there's a child. And basically they provide background information on this child when they go into the court system, and ultimately try to help them find a safe and permanent home. So how does a child end up in foster care? For this example, I'm going to be using a fictional character. We're going to call him Gary, but he'd be your typical child that would go to foster care. And so let's just say he's 4 years old, kind of average, and he has two parents, but they don't really get along very well. In fact, they don't really pay much attention to Gary. He kind of was a mistake to them, and financials have become a problem in this family, and kind of like the market crash of 2008, they got into a bit of a financial crisis, and Gary got placed in the middle of that, and he's ultimately kind of the one that gets burned. Then the parents will end up turning to drugs and alcohol, and ultimately, neglect Gary, where sometimes these children end up abused and neglected. And so the 5 biggest stress factors that we have for this, kind of the biggest reasons that children will end up in foster care, are the following, the biggest one being drugs and alcohol. So if a situation is unsafe for a child, protective services will step in, take that child away from the environment, and just kind of take them away from that, provide a safe home, food, shelter, that sort of thing. Currently we see 580 children in foster care in Marion County. This is where we're working. By the way, CASA is a national organization, and they have different organizations throughout the state, every state, and then in every county. So that child will be taken to court, and the judge will ultimately decide what happens to him, whether he gets reinstated with his parents or goes into foster care. So back to our problem, the limited number of volunteers. CASA currently serves 28% of these children, and obviously they would like to serve 100% of them. An average child spends about 20 months. Now, this can range. Some children spend up to 1 day in foster care. Others will spend up until they're 21 and ultimately kicked out onto the streets. CASA has 54 volunteers right now. And to be able to serve every child, we would like to see them reach up to 290 volunteers. And that would mean that every CASA serves 2 children. The ideal situation would be that every CASA serves one child. And this is just to ensure that they have the best situation, kind of be there for the child. They're kind of the most consistent person in that child's life at this point. And so now I will be passing on to Bobby Hutchins, who will he'll talk about the financial benefit of having a CASA.
Thanks, Zach. So one of our objectives as consultants for CASA of Marion County was to find how much the CASA saves the taxpayer in the courtroom. So here we see a foster child costs the state around $1,069 a month. And these kids are, as previously mentioned, in care for about 20 months, meaning the total cost would be about $20,311. With the costs involved, we can see these kids being placed up to 6 months sooner, meaning that there is a savings. The CASA saves the state about $6,400, which is pretty significant. And so CASA doesn't only save taxpayers money, but they also reduce the amount of placements that these foster children see in their time in care. So these placements are multiple moves from home to home, and we see that these multiple moves from home to home negatively impacts a foster child's emotional, educational, and social growth. And there was even a study done in California that showed that a child with even one less placement was twice as likely to graduate from high school on time. And so we see here, there's a graph of the percentage of average number of placements that children receive. We see the majority lie between the 1 and 2 placement range, but over 40% lie within 3 or more placements. And so using this information, we see that to accommodate for the 580 children in foster care in Marion County, it would cost the state about $30 million to accommodate for all of their placements, the average number of placements. And with the costs involved and their goal to place these children the first time through, we see that they can have the potential to save around $9,700,000. And so we had a problem while researching. We found that a lot of our sources were outdated, very outdated. And so the validity of this information, though CASA does save taxpayers money, this information is outdated, and that's important to note. And so onto our recommendation section. We have 3 recommendations, the first being hiring more staff, the second being an internship program, and the third being sharing CASA's story. And so the first, more staff. Marion County CASA, under Oregon state law, can only, for every 1 full-time employee, there can only be 30 volunteers. And so in order to reach the 580 foster children, CASA needs more employees to thus have more volunteers. And so we see CASA currently only has 3 full-time employees. And so initially we suggest hiring 1 full-time employee in order to start this process of their goal of reaching 580 foster children. And to do this, we see that CASA would be financially able. As last year's financial year, we see revenues exceeded expenses by $36,000, and their asset account has been growing historically. And we also suggest a 10-year plan, hiring 1 employee every year for 10 years at a cost of around $34,000, which is the national average for a CASA employee. And here is the forecasted salary expense, just an image of how that will grow over the next 10 years. And after year 10, CASA will have a yearly salary expense of around $400,000. So now I will hand it back off to Zach to explain the rest of our recommendations.
Thanks, Bobby. So an exciting recommendation that we have for CASA of Marion County is a new internship program. That first initial hire would be in charge of finding interns, specifically business, creative writing, and political science majors, pulling those from local colleges. Colleges like Corban that have a REACH program require volunteering, so that sort of thing. This is where we get those. And we also wanted to restructure their hierarchy. So with hiring on 2 new employees, the first one within the first year, and then a marketing director, and then the 8 interns below those. We took a lot of our suggestions and structuring from National CASA as well as the Texas CASA. The reason being is because Texas CASA has 3 programs that currently serve 100% of their children, and they've done that very well for the past couple of years. They have a lot of webinars and research and resources available to CASAs for free to be able to kind of replicate their program. And so here are the 8 new internship positions. I'll be going over each one of these briefly. So first off, kind of program services. Our goal is to reach local churches and kind of spread awareness about what CASA is doing. And We do this through having guest speakers show up to churches, share their story, possibly have CASAs that were foster children and sharing their story. So kind of setting that up. And we would also like a story developer. We want to kind of capture what's going on with children in foster care. So initially we want to start off with like 12 stories and 12 children, possibly even CASAs as well. Legal and advocacy position. There's a lot of legal issues that affect foster care and children in the court system. So it is very important for CASA to keep up to date with what is going on. Bills like HB 2171 will affect CASA of Marion County specifically. And there's a new House bill that requires a specific amount of full-time employees for every 30 volunteers that show up and help out. And there's a general fund. They're saying that there might be $15 million that will be redistributed to CASAs around Oregon. So, and here's currently that bill in progress. It's very early in the stages, but it's looking hopeful. Marketing assistant, like I said, later on we'd like to hire a marketing position. While CASA's mission and goal is to serve the children, they need to be able to gain more volunteers to be able to do that. Digital media, we also want to capture the stories on videos like testimonies to be able to share them. And PowerPoints like this possibly go through at churches to just gain awareness and let people know what is going on. Relational specialist, to be able to kind of get the foot in the door with local churches, just introducing, building that relationship to be able to do this sort of thing. And finances. Currently there's one person, the executive director, that deals with all the finances, and we just see this as too tedious of a job to maybe for somebody that makes a lot of the big decisions of where CASA of Marion County is going. And a volunteer coordinator assistant. With new volunteers coming on, they're going to need a lot more help kind of keeping track. Like I said, they're going to need more full-time employees to be able to take on all of these. And next, Princia will be talking about sharing CASA's story and how they're going to do that.
Thank you, Zach. So moving right along to the current demographics of the volunteers and donors that Marion County has right now. These are the friends, the family, and the people who are closely related to CASA. This could mean that they were foster children before, and now they come back and serve the children and be exactly who they needed when they were a child. 51% of these volunteers and donors are of the age of 60 and over. So as a solution to the problem of not having enough volunteers and donors, we recommend that CASA share their story through video, speakers, and written stories. We recommend that they work with public relations companies such as Venata, GISI Marketing, and Copycat, all of these located in Salem, that they would work with these companies to strategically write impactful stories and share these stories throughout local churches, as Zach mentioned earlier. We did contact Venata specifically, and they mentioned that the cost of their labor would be $3,500 to $6,000 to outsource such work. This depends on the quality and the time that they put into this. We do recognize that CASA does not have that funding as of right now, so that is where the story developer internship position that Zach mentioned earlier as well would come in and cover this at first. So we recommend that, as I said earlier, that they would distribute these written pamphlets to different churches in Marion County. Currently there are 50 churches in Marion County, ranging from non-denominational to Catholic, Baptist to Pentecostal, that they share these stories at the churches. Right now, they are sharing the stories through word of mouth, through the volunteers that are attending these churches. But to dive a little deeper, we want that they share with the written pamphlets as well. The stories of, like Gary's story. See, Gary was a foster child, and he was abused and he was neglected with no hope of a family. But with the help of his CASA advocate, he was put into a loving home, and he was loved and cared for. Wouldn't we all want to see children get back into the foster care system later on to be exactly who they needed when they were a child as well. We would like to thank Shani Starr, our advisor, or our client, the Hoff School of Business and Griff. We would like to thank Don Levitt and all the professors and all of you here. We would like to thank Danny as well. She was our advisor. Thank you.
All righty, judges. Oh, they're busy taking notes. I need to give them a chance to finish their note-taking, I see. Richard?
CASA just moved into new space. Have you been to the space? Do they have room for these 8 volunteers to be there?
So part of those internship programs, we said because of that, there isn't enough space for them. So part of these would be telecommuting. So they would be doing a lot of their work at home or in other spaces. And so, but they would be trained and everything in-house and in the building. But yeah, a lot of them, most of them would be telecommuting.
Bruce?
So you said there was funding for the first new hire, but you want to hire a new person every year. How do you develop funding for years 9 through 10?
So part of the initiative of sharing the story with churches would hopefully be contacting benefactors from people, the community in those churches. Currently, most of their funding does come from individuals, and that's kind of the target that we're going after, those middle-aged working families. And so hopefully through sharing the story, people that have a passion for helping children in their local community would be the benefactors to be able to provide that money to be able to hire on new employees every year.
Norma?
So a lot of organizations that provide a service don't have, they're focusing a lot on providing that service. How would you justify having so many people doing marketing and social media for this type of organization?
Yeah, so you're saying because their mission is to help the children, that would be kind of pulling away from what they're doing. Yeah, well, justification for that is to aim at gaining more volunteers. That's kind of the goal, to be able to help out the 580 children here. And so in order to get 290 volunteers, we kind of have to reach out to a lot of local communities and churches. So like a big initiative of that is to market and to share the story, because currently they mostly just have local events to gain volunteers, and we would like to see them branch out a little bit more to be able to gain those. And so that's kind of the justification, is gaining more volunteers.
Brock?
Okay, so love your illustrations. Love Gary the Kid. I want to know, okay, so I'm guessing volunteers and interns equal success for you. The ratio is the success rate, yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So then I do want to talk about the staff that you're going to hire. Some of the staff that you had up there, did you think about like outsourcing some of their positions so you could bring on more of the people that would make this successful to hire that ratio? So outsourcing your marketing person, outsourcing so you won't have to pay that much, reallocating those funds so you can have interns and volunteers to make yourself successful.
Right, so like maybe as a benefactor themselves, just like volunteering that time to be able to market for them?
Yeah, well, my main question is outsourcing.
Right.
Did you look into outsourcing some of those positions so you wouldn't have to hire a full-time staff person?
Not so much. We really didn't think to outsource. That's a really good idea. That's a good point. But we mostly looked at just, hiring straight up.
Sure.
For them.
And then one more other thing about Texas. So they seem to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
They've got the ratio, 1-to-1 ratio figured out. Did you guys contact them and ask them about their structure?
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
And everything follows their structure, I'm guessing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah.
great.
Yeah, they have tons of resources, just tons of free information, because they just want to see every other CASA be as successful as they are.
Rick, and then Art.
Hey, I thought you guys looked sharp, and I thought you really knew your subject. You obviously knew what you were talking about up there, and I appreciate that. Where I wanted to see a little more meat was in the financial plan and how that was going to come about. That's just basically a comment there.
I loved your presentation. A lot of heart, a lot of passion, and you present a good case. Has anybody in a community ever come forward with or maybe approach the subject of, yes, recruiting people, but what about loaned executives? Where a business will come forward and say, look, we'll, maybe as part of management and leadership training, build it into a leadership development program in a company where a person who's a potential manager is part of that process, maybe spending 10 or 15 hours a month loaned out to the community to an organization such as CASA. In other words, out there in the community in a public affairs or public relations program, but working with this type of organization. And I mean, the benefit of that, I mean, it's a win on both, actually on all three sides. CASA, the organization, and the child that's going to be mentored and just covered. But to me, the idea of a loaned executive, this thing just screams loaned executives for companies, larger companies too. Many of them, I would probably say, have never even thought about it. And I'm also probably going to, and I'm going to say this too, nobody's approached them with it. So go for it.
That's a very good point. Thank you for that. Maybe I could talk to you later afterwards about more of that, so we can suggest that to our client.
So could I clarify just, CASA, most of CASA's funding is coming from where again, could you?
Individual donors.
And is it a charity, a 501c3?
Yes, yes it is.
Okay.
Yeah, we did look into kind of going towards accessing grants and funding from foundations, but a lot of what Texas CASA said, we talked to them, and they're like, it's just so difficult. Competition for getting grants is just so high between these types of organizations, so it's not as successful as going for local community.
Yeah. But why, given there's so much savings for the governmental organizations, why isn't there more government funding?
Why isn't there more
government funding coming to an organization like CASA that's having such a direct, you showed the direct benefit to.
Yeah. What's that?
So on a state level, there is more funding governmentally, but on a local level in Marion County, there isn't. So it's more of the donors in Marion County.
And kind of the problem is there is, like, a lot of that funding has been taken away from CASA, organizations like CASA, unfortunately. Plus with this bill coming out that requires that every child has a CASA represented in court, it kind of doesn't make sense that the government doesn't fund it fully, because they're the ones requiring that all of these children have a CASA, but it's up to the CASA to fundraise and provide all that money and volunteers and all of that.
It must be my Britishness. I thought something was odd. Thank you.
Katie?
Are there certain qualifications these court-appointed volunteers have to meet?
Yes. Yeah, they do go through a strict training program. So, yeah, they do.
Do they have to have a legal background, or is there a way to approach universities or law schools or to search for volunteers? Or?
They have speakers who come from the court to speak to them. It's a 30-hour training, I believe. So that is where they get the law.
And they do have to be over 21 to be able to volunteer.
Who funds that part? The training, the 30 hours of training.
CASA does. Yeah.
Real quick question. And correct me if I'm wrong on my numbers, but you'd said that there's basically a $36,000 surplus and your hope is to bring on one staff person for $34,000 a year, and that's where you're getting that. First off, your $34,000 a year salary was based on the national average. What's the actual average salary for specifically this locale? Because obviously Marion County pays differently than the middle of Wyoming. And so what's the specific salary that we'd be looking at, and did that take into consideration benefits as well as retirement and all the other expenses that go into that?
Yeah, we initially tried researching that, but we were unable to get the information of what the typical salary would be of Marion County CASA, full-time employee. And as far as benefits, we didn't really decide, or we didn't kind of mark that out, what the benefits would be besides just the salary.
And I think it does follow standards. There's a CASA handbook that they have distributed to each local CASA, and there are standards for that. So it's not like all over the place. There are standards for it.
Norma has a okay, Bob, and then Norma.
I just wanted to say I want to thank you for this presentation. Goodness, I for one did not know that this existed, and I'm going back to Texas on Wednesday, and I will look into CASA in Texas, and I don't know, I'm either ill-informed or naive, but I will look into it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Were you able to look at other community resources to maybe see what else was out there to form some type of partnership, so you don't have to bring in, more staff and kind of, because if you're adding more staff and you're relying on donations, that's not really a good source of reliable income for people. But do you look at other organizations and maybe other similar organizations that had a similar structure and budget and those type of things, that they've done a great marketing plan and social media plan and all of that?
Yeah, so you're asking if they should, if we researched any companies that they could kind of partner with to be able to help them with this?
Yeah, I guess I'm asking two questions in one. The first one would be, any organizations that you could that CASA could partner with to kind of, achieve their goals. And the other one would be examples of organizations that have done what CASA wants to do here locally that have a similar structure.
Yeah, so we did research that. United Way being one of the biggest organizations that would be able to partner with CASA, and we kind of outlined how that would work in our paper. But yeah, going to them. And also National CASA does provide help and somewhat consulting for local organizations that are kind of struggling to get their volunteers and meet the required number of children. And then second question, there aren't very many organizations that do exactly what CASA does. They're very unique in what they do to help children specifically that don't live in a safe environment. They aren't the ones to take them out of that, but they're just advocating. They're not a lawyer to the child. They're just helping be with the child and providing background information, helping them find a safe home.
All righty, thank you very much.